Well, good evening, everyone. You may be able to tell I'm not Lancastrian by origin. Any ideas? Good? I always feel like I don't have an accent, so that's okay. Sorry? Yorkshire? No. I grew up in Leicestershire, in the middle of the country, and was born at zero, like most people was, really. And Hinckley's I used to live in a place called Hinckley. Now, everybody knows Hinckley because it's halfway between Leicester and Coventry. That's about as much as it's got going for it, really. That I think we had somebody that won Gladiators once that came from there. And if you've ever watched the programme Heartbeat, there was a drunk man in that called Bill Maynard, I think he was. He switched on the Christmas lights every year. He was our local celebrity. So Hinckley, was a very working class, very poor town, really. And that's the upbringing that I had as well. My dad worked in a print factory. My mum worked as a dinner lady as well as we were growing up. So we lived a very simple life, but we were on the fringes of church when we were younger. We went along to the social aspects and the drama group. We eventually joined, and they had beavers and cubs and scouts and all the uniformed organisations that we grew up in. So when we started to go along more, we heard the stories about Jesus and Bible stories and learnt them in Sunday school, but you can learn those stories, can't you? And you never realise that there's a relationship behind those stories and a God that you can meet through that. So we carried on going along to church and becoming part of things. And then as a family, around I was the age 13 or so, my dad was diagnosed with cancer for the first time, and then he was treated and he got well, but by the age I was 14, so only a year later, he was re-diagnosed with cancer. And I remember having that night as a young 14-year-old with the conversation that I'm coming to the realization that it was terminal at this point, that Dad wasn't going to get better. And he got really involved in our lives. He led the youth group at church, but deteriorated. And so we ended up seeing him go to hospital and eventually deteriorate down to seeing him die. When I was age 15, my sister was 17. And we were coming to terms with that. My family, we're a very close unit. But I realised that at 15 years old, I had to step up and be man of the house, be responsible and become very independent at that time. I think when you go through that as a young, and I don't know if anybody here has gone through bereavement like that at a fairly young age, people don't really know how to deal with you that well. They think that if they say anything to you, you're going to immediately burst out crying. And they think that you're not going to be able to function, that you're going, well, but I decided that wasn't going to be me. I was going to be strong and independent and be that man of the house. Unfortunately, that message never got through to school at the same time. And for the entire year of my GCSEs, I was completely isolated from everybody. I was the kid whose dad died, who, not that they were deliberately wanting to avoid me, but they just didn't know how to deal with me. And interestingly, when I was 26, which is 12 years or so ago, I got in contact with somebody from school who God had been speaking to him about things that had happened. And he invited me over and had a meal with him. And he said God had really been pressing that he should have been there for me during that time. And I was able to say, well, I forgive you. And after that, but yeah, so it was a really, really difficult time. But I managed to get through GCSEs and then into A-levels. And the church had a youth group, and our youth group was lively. And there were some really good people in that. And we met up with some people from a different village And these guys in this youth group had something that I didn't have. There was a life to them, but there was a passion to them. There was a relationship, I believe, with Jesus that they had that I didn't know that I had. And so through that year, 2 significant events happened. We as an area were invited, we're Methodist churches, I don't know, so invited to be part of the Methodist big weekend, which used to take place in London. And we used to hire out the Royal Albert Hall and Brixton Academy and then have a big party in Trafalgar Square at the end of that. And our youth group was invited to be part of the Royal Albert Hall show. So we were meeting together with about 50 or so other young people. And one weekend, somebody sidled up to me and said, I think you're about the same height as this other guy. It's like, yeah, I am. He said, good. Well, he's going to play Indiana Jones and you're going to play James Bond in our piece. I was like, okay. And this is a very surreal piece of work that we did in the Royal Albert Hall. But some people got the parts of pyramids that turned into skyscrapers, and there was some people that were camels. But I got to be James Bond in the Royal Albert Hall, and we filled it out for 3 events. There was 5,000 screaming youngsters each time. And when I did that, you know, when you're young and you're getting involved in big things like that, I think at that time God was dealing with my fear. I didn't know that, but I remember looking around at all these other people that were amazed by the size of this venue, and they were completely frightened and what was going to happen. I was like, it's going to be fine. They're only watching. So we got involved in that. We did that. It was an amazing experience. And then at the same time, they were wanting to take me along to Bible studies. And we ended up registering to go to an event called Easter People. Nobody's ever heard of that. Oh, yeah, some people have heard of that. Great. And this was in Bournemouth, and nobody else really from my youth group wanted to go. But I tagged along with this other group and got amazed that there were 10,000 Christians going into Bournemouth. They were meeting together and they were talking about this Jesus that they really knew. And the way Easter People worked, it was like, I think the modern festivals now, they tend to have one massive celebration in the evening. But Easter People kind of gave this pick and mix evening celebrations. So if you were into traditional worship, you could go to that one if you wanted to go to something more charismatic. And I ended up getting hooked on a venue which was called the Church of the Prophetic Edge. Now, every other venue finished at 9:00, and then at 9:45 you'd have what they call fringe events, so like entertainers and comedians and things. The Church of the Prophetic Edge started at 7:15, didn't have anything on afterwards. And so each night I was going along and seeing people really meeting Jesus, singing out to him, and I was just transfixed. Like, what I've heard about this Jesus, I've read the stories, but these people have something that I don't. And every single night, they would have the announcement, if you want to know Jesus, come forward, we'll pray for you. And every night I sat on my hands, desperately trying to avoid dealing with this, I guess, pressure and call that was on me, that Jesus was almost wanting to get to know me. On the last night, at the end of my row, they decided to put the prayer team dotted around the venue. So instead of going forward for prayer, the prayer team would come to you. And on the end of my row was a local preacher from my area who I think had got an idea that when it came to that time, I was sitting on my hands, and came down the row and said, can I pray with you? So I said, okay. And he said, let's come into the middle of the aisle. And he said, you want to know Jesus? And I was like, yeah, I need Jesus in my life. And so he prayed, and I got down on my knees. And that night, I gave my life to Jesus. When I went back to church, I don't know if they were quite ready for what happened to me, nor my family as well. But you see how God uses things in life because of what had happened to us when we were 15 and my sister was 17. The church of about 300 people had all wanted to be mothers to us. They wanted to look after us. They wanted to reach out to the family. They didn't know how, but they wanted to care for us. So when I came back on fire, the church wanted to give me the opportunity to listen and to share what God had done and what Jesus had done in my life. And so I got cut short because I can talk about things for a long, long time. But what that meant is that they gave me opportunities that had never been given to anybody else in the church. Just to put in context of what it was like, I was the first person in the pulpit that could preach without a tie. You know, that was a big thing in that time. But at the same time, they got to listen. At 17 years old, I became a member of the church and did the membership classes. And at that time, you have to get up and share about who Jesus is in front of the whole church. And I was, I guess what you'd say, on fire at that time. And then we came to this evening. We had a youth group with different leaders. And they decided one Sunday night to take us all out to the local pub, have a pub meal at the night time. And some of the youngsters, shall we say, were not as controlled in their behaviour as we were, so ended up climbing on cars in the car park. The pub manager told them off, of course, and the youth leaders then, of course, told them off. Sadly, what transpired after that is that basically some people didn't like their children being told off, which then led to the youth leaders quitting. And with a group of about 20 young people, we had no youth leaders willing to take them on in this church. So at 17 years old, on fire, I said, I'll do it. And my sister was slightly older than me, and the church were like, these are the... I don't mean to say it like the golden children, but do you know what I mean? Favoured by the church. So they said, all right, if you want to do it, you do it. And so we managed to turn this youth group into a youth fellowship, which sounds like just a name change, but actually the priorities were very different. We weren't about entertaining the children. We were about them getting to know who Jesus was. And we started to encourage them to go along to something like Easter People as well. And one of my highlights was, I think, 2001. I had 9 letters through the post from the Easter People team telling me that some of the young people had responded just like I had and become Christians at the festival. And so God, it was a very unusual scenario because we only had about 2 years between us and the age of the youngsters as well. So we weren't as such authority figures, but what we had was Christ in us, the hope of glory, and we were able to share that with them. And then that continued, and I managed to end up going along to lots of different events and finding myself tucked into meetings at the side of them who were asking me to be on the national leadership of some of the Methodist churches' youth work. And I think a few of us, we ended up in a side room and then suddenly came out and we were with the quiz advisory group for the national events that the church was running. But that just got us involved in wanting to see young people enjoying being part of the church, but knowing why they're part of the church. And that really affected all the way through what God wanted for me as well. And every week they were coming to me, and you know how you listen to people's stories and they're they hurt, don't they? You know, when you hear of young people going through terrible times and getting bullied, and you want to do something, and you can't go to be at school with them. You can't, but you can encourage them. And so every week, bizarrely, we were very musical as a family. And the caretaker of the school that my mum worked at one day just decided to bring a piano into our house. so terribly out of tune. We live next door to a boxing trainer who I remember one night scared us very much because you don't play the piano after 10 o'clock at night, because I don't want to upset him at all, really. But we learnt little bits, and I was listening to the stories, and I'd plonk it out on nothing like musicians here, but just plonk it out on there, and then try and write songs for them. So at the end 10 minutes for all the youngsters, we'd sing a song that was directly about their situation, not just that we were a song that linked their situation, but I remember one of them was a song called I Don't Care, which was about I don't care what people think of me because I want to follow Jesus first. And so we were singing that. And one day I got a phone call from BBC Radio Leicester, who were like, somebody's told you what you're doing at the end of the group. I was like, really? Who's told you? I'm plonking a piano, not playing, just plonking a piano and singing. And it was such an embarrassing morning because they actually took one of the songs, they played it on the show. It was terrible, awful recording of it. Not a fine moment, but they liked the story of how we were trying to reach. And that really then raised the profile of what we were doing in Hinckley. Other people heard about it because of my stature as well. We were known around the church as the Hinckley Massive as well. But then people the doors began to open. And because of that focus of we wanted the youngsters to know Jesus, people then wanted to know about some of the stuff that we were doing. So in that time, and I'm going to try and condense as much. Okay. In that time, we were always looking for creative ways. And interestingly, this morning I had a meeting with somebody in Blackpool who was always just challenging about what is going on in your towns where people are, like this outreach that you do. Where are you going to bring Jesus? Not where are you expecting people to come to receive Jesus. Where are you yourself going to bring Jesus to people? And so we started a football club at the church, and a lot of times people just join together and they play a bit of football. You know, we were not going to do that. We wanted to be proper. We wanted to be as professional as possible. We wanted our own kit. We had a match day program. We wanted the players to be coming into the church and telling them all about what they were doing. And these were non-Christians as well. But we formed this club. And God has a unique way of humbling his children, I think, as well, because I made a big deal of it in church. I was like, this is the way we're going to reach men. We're going to have this football club. We're going to do everything and so we invited the church to come to the opening game of the season, which was against Coventry Cathedral. And one time we did play them, and they said we had to go back because they'd got Evensong, which made us feel quite bad when they hammered us playing us. But we got the entire church to come along to watch this game, this opening game of the season, we to encourage the young men, and we lost 8-0. And I ended up volleying somebody's head in that game and breaking their cheekbone and sending them to hospital. But people could see the enthusiasm of that we were actually trying to do something to reach people. I never lived that down. In the church, nobody ever wanted to play football with me again, and what's the position? Left back in the changing rooms most weeks, I think. So, but slowly some of these guys, they began to have children. They began to get them christened, dedicated. They came along for the church. They began to pray, and they began to talk about why we cared so much about doing this stuff for them. We were never very good But the church realised that we were meeting people. In that time, and as I'd said, there's so much in my story, but in that time, I then met a woman. Would you believe, at a garage dance metal concert? I met her, a Christian garage dance metal concert with somebody called the Band With No Name, who I think, as a Chip Kay leads Audacious Church now, but when he's reaching out to the youngsters, I laugh because we got together at an event 15 years ago where he was youthy. So, but anyway, and slowly began to fall in love. But what I asked from God is that I wanted somebody who was as sold out for him. And you know, you've seen relationships sometimes where it's unevenly yoked as such that somebody is far out, and then there's somebody else that's not. I was like, God, I want that. I want somebody to be as passionate about Jesus as I am. And God bless me incredibly in that way. And over 3.5 years, we ended up getting together, got engaged, and then got married in a place called Frodsham, which is not far from here, and had our wedding reception at Walton Hall, which is in Warrington as well. So that's now 12 years. Yeah, it was owned by the council then when we got married. So whilst it's quite a nice place to be, it was quite cheap in those days as well. So, you know, what you ask for from God is that you want to serve him first and foremost and not have any hindrance in that. And I just thank the way that he's so faithful to me, and that I've got a wife who's just as sold out to me. She would have loved to have been here, but we're getting ready for people to come into our centre tomorrow. And also she's working in Bradford tomorrow. So I think she's going to be up at 6:30 to get across to there. But when you've got to do something great, that you believe, is great for God, then you want somebody to go on that journey with you. And that stops you from becoming, I guess, so isolated, just like I was as a teenager, that I know whatever I want to do for God, that she's with me, and whatever she wants to do for God, that I'm with her. So we had our vows, and we wrote our own vows, but we also wanted to bring God into that service. Her father-in-law is a minister. He's been a minister for many years, but he said that our wedding was the most Christian wedding that he'd ever been to, because we recognised that a lot of our family were not Christians. So we said, you know, we know where we are with Jesus, but we don't want a sermon that's going to talk about love and things like that. We want the gospel preached. We want the good news spread. And so they did that, and it was a great thing. But after 6 months of marriage, we moved to a place called Worcester, famous for the sauce. A little factual information: if you buy Worcestershire sauce, it's not from Worcester, but Worcester sauce is from the Liam Perrins factory. Yawn, but anyway, still. But we lived in Worcester, and we bought a house on a council estate on the west side of Worcester, which is the wrong side for commuting, but a very needy area of Worcester. And within 6 months, Laura fell very ill. And I won't go into detail about what happened, but after 3 months of that, it meant that she needed care. And I had to look after her for 2 months, I think it was, in the end. We were really searching, like we'd moved to this new place, and what was going on in our life, but we cared for each other. And in that time, God began to speak about what we should be doing. And I've been involved in youth work for a long time. We'd left that behind to move to Worcester. But God was saying that you need to reach out to a different generation. Your youth are now in their 20s, but they still have a plan and a purpose in their life, and that they need to continue to rest with Jesus. So we decided to organise a retreat weekend in Wales for people around about our age at the time, which was mid-20s. And wisely or unwisely, we called it crackpots. Based on the fact that we're all cracked pots. But unfortunately, in that time, I had to go to some very big events, and you should imagine the kind of looks. Nobody takes you seriously when you were promoting crackpots. But on that weekend, we were thinking, well, we'll have a bit of fun, we'll play a bit of golf, we'll enjoy time together, and we'll watch a movie. Do you remember how I said that the Church of the Prophetic Edge started at 7 and had nothing afterwards? Well, nearly 10 years later, we started our evening worship meeting together at 7 o'clock, and we were still going on late into the night. We forgot the movie because God was speaking into people's lives at that time, and even moving, calling people into things. And the thing he said to us, try and remember again, is that you should have a place where you can do this all the time. And that was 2006. So what's that? 12 years ago now. Life went on. Laura got better. She got back to work. I continued to do some random work for myself, which involved, somebody once told us if you don't diversify, you die, but we took it to the wrong extreme, basically. So we ended up buying a crazy golf course, a portable crazy golf course. We also ended up getting heavily involved in fair trade, which I don't know if you've heard of the fair trade movement, but we ended up having a warehouse in Worcestershire, in where we were shipping out masses and masses of products across the country, unique products that were only stocked by our company. And then in the summer of 2011, all the schools that we were working with, they didn't have their budgets renewed. So by the end of the summer, I think it was August 2011, we had a full warehouse of stock, nowhere to send it, and no way of paying our bills. So we had to make the company bust. At that time, I think it's declared insolvent, and then we wait for people to... and for me, I'd been able to work around and about. I'd been able to do lots of things, and my identity was ripped from me in the space of, a couple of weeks, once I realised that we were not going to have this. And I blamed myself for that. I took it really hard. And I spent 2 months in bed. I think what we call it now is depression, severe depression, where you couldn't get up, you couldn't move, you didn't have any motivation to do anything. Your world was crumbling around you. You wanted no input from anybody else. But God is faithful, because everything that I'd learnt in my journey up to that point knew that I was in a deep pit. But the only way out of that pit was with Jesus. And that was the only way. Now, I say this with a product warning. Okay, this is testimony, not doctrine. Okay, because everybody has lots of different journeys that they go on. But for me, I wouldn't even consider going to the doctors, because I knew that the Word of God and praying to God would be enough. So some days there was a song by a band called Casting Crowns, if you've ever heard of them, As Far as the East is from the West. Do you know that song at all? Some days during that period, that was on repeat for 18 hours of the day. But I journaled. I was writing how I honestly felt with God. And some of that was brutally honest. You know, why have you taken this away from me? I thought I was serving you. But I prayed. And over that time, God began to lift me. All the things that I thought would happen, all the terrible things of losing a business didn't happen. God protected us from that. But by the end of the 2 months, we pretty much had nothing at all. We were getting to that point where you knew that if something didn't happen, we would almost have to make ourselves bankrupt as well. No money was coming from anywhere. And on that last day, when we knew that, I had a job interview. And they were so confused because I'd been a director of this company for about 5 years. And it was an entry-level job that I was going for. And they asked me that in the interview, why on earth are you, this is well, away from where you should be working. But then at the end of that, within a day, I got offered that job. And God's hand is in things. I believe that, and I'm going to tell you a couple more stories later on about how I believe that God has done something on a massive scale to help me as well. And this is a £500 million housing association. Okay, a £500 million housing association in Worcester at the time when I needed it, on the last day, and it was called Sanctuary. And so I got that job, and I got my head down for about, they knew that obviously I was coming out of depression, but there was a sort of a limit of how much work you had to do to survive. And it was 150 transactions a day you had to process in the job. Within 2 weeks, I was processing 400 because I wasn't talking to anybody. I was just so used to working for myself, and they saw that. And after about 6 months, I started to realize why I was there. I got moved desk-wise, and they sat me next to an atheist. He was well known for having great atheist conversations in the office. And I had nothing, I couldn't debate with him, but all I just wanted to tell him was my story. How Jesus had rescued me from this pit. And they'd seen it. You see, they'd seen the transformation. So actually, sometimes you can look back and tell a story, but actually sometimes it's really powerful when you're going through real great difficulties. And the people around you can see how God is bringing you out of those great difficulties. And on my contract ended after about a year, and they were like, "You've got to stay. We need you. You can do what you want. We can't lose that amount of work." And I was like wrestling again. What I want to do is whatever God wants me to do. It would be very convenient to stay there, but I was feeling like God was doing something else. And in the week beforehand, so one of my friends, who I'm still in contact with now and keep praying for him, said, "Well, you could do whatever you wanted. You could ask for 2 days if you want. Why don't you just ask for 2 days a week to work for them? Because it's good to have a safety net." And for me, those 2 words hit me as if somebody was thumping on the side of my head. Because I said, no, I've got a safety net already. God can look after me. So on the end of that week, I left. The end of my contract, I left the workplace. And what I like to say is that, you won't mind me saying, normally in an office, if you leave, if you've been around there, you might get a card on your desk, you might get a gift voucher, and people will say some pleasantries. But when I got in there on the last day, there was a parcel. And I thought, oh, this is unusual for me. And obviously I had to open it in front of everybody as well. And as I opened it, it was a book. And the book was called A Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And as I delved into that, I discovered that it was the atheist friend who had researched and bought that for me, because afterwards I asked him why, and he said, well, gift vouchers are so nondescript. Sorry for anybody that's bought them for anybody else, but we really wanted to get something that meant something to you, to remember your time there. And what I like is that they knew that Jesus meant something to me. But on that day, I left, nothing ahead. A Again, we're in the 2 months we're in that situation until I realised that I needed to do my tax return. And that month we were £500 short of what we needed. I did my tax return. I was due a rebate. How much do you think? £500 exactly. And God managed to meet that need. And then I've skipped a big part of my story, but I was involved in Christian musicals as well and travelled around the country performing in a Christian musical. We did like the Royal Northern College up here and Birmingham Symphony Hall. And the second time we did the musical, I played Jesus in it. And we did 51 venues, I think, around the country, meeting thousands of people. And the choirs, I think we would vary from having 30 in the choir to, I think we had 1,000 in the choir at Symphony Hall. And we the way we describe it is that although we were doing the solos at the front, we filled in the gaps because everybody was really going to see the local choirs. And we just told the story and shared the message. And we got in contact just after I'd left Sanctuary, and the people that had organised that said, we think there's a door opening. And it's been 12 years, but we think it's time to take the musical to Israel. And we want to give the original cast, as such, first dibs on whether they want to go and perform this musical out in Israel. So I thought for about half a second, probably, I think, and said, if I get the opportunity, I want to go and do that. So 3 months after I'd left work, we took, I think, a choir of 50 out there to Israel, and we performed the musical in Bethlehem and in Jerusalem. And also we got to perform one song. If anybody's ever been to Israel at all, we got to perform one song at the Garden Tomb as well, just outside that. And they decided it was one of Jesus' songs that they should do out there. So I did nearly 2.5 years of my life doing this part, and then only at the Garden Tomb was the first time I cried actually performing. But meeting some people over there just get me a heart for reaching people. And then we came back and somebody got in contact with us from India. I was like, I'm not really interested in going to India. And then over the course of 3 months, we knew that God was saying, you need to go. We met a guy who we prayed for at one of our events who felt a calling to exactly the area that we'd been invited to. And I felt, I need to be taking people out there to live what it means to live as Jesus. So we got 4 of us together and travelled to this place that we'd never, nobody from the UK saw had ever been to this area before, and certainly they were not used to meeting people like us out there. And we just released these guys to stand with 30 minutes notice and preach the gospel to villages of over 1,000 people. And they were sitting back in the car and going like, I'm not an evangelist. It's like, how many evangelists would want 1,000 people to listen to their message? But it just got me stirring away, and to cut things over the course of a few years, we ended up going to Malta. In fact, we went to Malta, I think 4 years in a row to do semi-mission, semi-holiday, I'd say. It's what I call a mission light. So the most extreme thing you might do is pray in the street. So, but you get to see a lot of the sights of how God worked in Malta. Then we also went to Rome as well. That was a bit more hands-on. And India again. But every time that you get out there, I'd be so encouraged by seeing what the guys were doing. But I'd be feeling like, but you're white, working class. You need to be reaching the people who are white, working class. I didn't say that, obviously, when I was out there, but that really instilled on my heart. And as I came back the second time from India, God was like saying, you've got to trust me, because I'm going to do some things with you, but you've got to learn how to trust. Even now, God still tells me that, because I've not learned the lesson yet. But so much so that they've opened a chemist opposite our house in Blackpool, and it's called the Trust Pharmacy. So every time I open the curtains or walk home, I can see the word trust in massive letters outside. But then he said, you're going to go to India. I'm going to give you nothing. Okay, nothing at all before you go. You're just going to have to believe that I can provide. So we were in Worcester. Laura ended up getting a job. We moved from our council house briefly to a fruit farm in the middle of nowhere. So we were living on a fruit farm. And God sent her to Manchester. And the only place we could afford to live was Moss Side in Manchester. Okay. Nice area. Yes. It's a lovely area. So we moved. We had a great network of people around us in Worcester. We went to Manchester. We had nothing. Seriously, nothing. And God taught us the most amazing lesson in that time. There was a song, I think, that was around at that time called Christ is Enough for Me. I think it's got to have I have decided to follow Jesus in it. Yeah, but Christ is enough for me. Such easy words to sing, sometimes such difficult things to live. And in that first month, we were down to financially a point where we were making bread. Okay, we couldn't afford anything but a bit of flour and water. We had none of our support network around us. We had no idea why we were there. And God was still saying, you're going to India and I'm giving you nothing. I'd like to share a story that this strong man of God, but the reality and the truth is, on the morning that I was due to try and go to India, I was rolling around in the front room in tears with my head in my hand saying, I can't do this. So much so that I drove off and forgot my passport, which is probably quite essential if you're going to try and get to India. Laura followed me down the motorway and delivered it. But as we were driving down, I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to see a man. I'm going to say, why are we doing this? Is this the lesson that we have to learn? And just outside of Birmingham, we were flying from Birmingham, I got a message on my phone. And somebody had made a donation to the ministry. Now, normally we get these through PayPal and they're like £10 or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay, I haven't got time to process this. But I opened it up and somebody who had no idea what we were doing had given us £1,000 at that point. And she had no reason except she was sitting there going, it's refreshment. I feel like God is saying, give this to refreshment. And so we managed to get on the plane, get out there. Every day we started off with nothing. And every day God met our needs in an amazing, sometimes very humbling way, because sometimes he met the needs out there. But I think the mission in the end ended up costing about £6,000. And God left us not one rupee short as we left the country. So I was like fired up. This is the God that we serve. This is the Jesus that we serve. Went to church and they were doing an appeal for work amongst homeless in Manchester. I went home as like, it's got to be first fruits. It's got to be, they need it. I have a house. I have everything they need it. Went through all our drawers, gave away my coats. I didn't force it up on Laura, but I was like, yeah, I don't need anything except you, Jesus. 5 days later, my car was a write-off. And I was working about a mile away from where I was in Manchester, and my car was a complete write-off. So there's no point in taking it anywhere. I was like, how real is this? I had no coat. We couldn't afford even to go and buy an umbrella. That time I had nothing. And I tell you the truth, I worked every single day during 18 months of time in Manchester. I walked to work and I walked back, and it rained on me 3 times in that entire time there. And the best occasion, we had some missionaries come over to do a mission in the university. We had to walk into Moss Side, about half an hour's walk away, and it was throwing it down. And I said to them, it's going to be fine. I promise you it's going to be okay, because I haven't got a coat and I haven't got an umbrella, and we need to do mission over there, so it's going to be okay. 5 minutes before we left, the rain stopped. We walked. 5 minutes after we arrived, the rain came again. And I can only thank God for that, because he still has the power over the wind and the waves. So then we began to trust even more about what he could do. We started these, and I don't recommend this at all to anybody, and it wasn't testing God. It was just, what can God do with us? We decided we'll go off to Minehead for a weekend. Just Minehead, we'll book nothing. We'll just go. And whatever God wants to do down there, he'll do. That's okay. We still made plans, like which service stations will be open throughout the night and things like that, just in case we needed it. We arrived where we were meant to be in Minehead, and a lady met us who we knew, who gave us 2 single beds for the night. Had no idea that we didn't have anywhere to stay, and took us in for that time. And so then I began to believe that God could do amazing things. And he took me back. And he took me back to that weekend called Crackpots in 2006. And I ended up going through lots of meetings during that time where people were prompting and said, what dreams has God given you? And if he's given you them, why haven't you done them yet? It's a challenging question. But he took me back to that Crackpots weekend and said, you need a place to do this. So we said, okay, God can do this. We don't have anything, but God has everything. So we trust him and we follow him. And over a period of 3 months, he led us to a vision about how we were going to reach people. He led us to a place. We had no links to Blackpool whatsoever. And on the day we went up to Blackpool, we were tearing our hair out as to what was the right way for us. And he said, you need to look at a care home. Clear as anything. It had only come on the market that day. I rang up and said, can I view this? The landlord introduced himself as Mr. Truelove. Okay. Within a day, we signed off on that place. And it's taken us 2 years to get the place up and running, and not without battles, and really, really painful battles that we've experienced. But God is bringing people into Blackpool where they're spending time in worship, they're praying, and they're getting to know him better, and they're making disciples themselves. Now, it took me 12 years from the vision to getting there, but God knew every single stage that we had to go through, every lesson that we had to learn. Nothing was wasted. But in that time, and I'll leave you with this, and especially in recent years, there's a verse that is almost imprinted on me, and it's the verse, nothing is impossible with God. So good a verse, it's in there 3 times in the Gospels. And I still believe that. And there was somebody that knocked on our door from a different faith. You know, they don't quite believe what we believe, but they knocked on the door, and I took them to that verse, and they said, "Oh, it's allegorical. You know, it's just an expression that God says about moving mountains." And I said to him, and I say to myself, what if it's not? What if following Jesus means that you have power to command the wind and the waves, that you can move mountains wherever you are, in whatever you're going through, because nothing is impossible to him. Or actually, in that verse where it talks about moving mountains, nothing is impossible for you. I still want to see some impossible things happen. I want to see Blackpool saved. And I'm going to stay there until, as we were singing earlier, until revival comes. And then it'll be time to move on. But revival comes in many different ways. But if it comes in a way that people know Jesus deeper, they see amazing things happen, they see friends and family come into a relationship with him, then we're all praying for that, aren't we? We want people to know him for everything that he is. Can I just pray? Is that okay? Jesus, we love the way that you're not passive with us. We thank you that you are with us, that you're walking alongside us, and you want to see amazing things happen in our lives. Father God, I just pray right now for the impossible situations that we seem to face. You say, or we say, sorry, that something may be a mountain, but you say it's only a mountain. Father God, I thank you for the mountains that you've moved in my life, and I pray now for more mountains to be moved. Father God, I pray against health issues. I pray against employment issues as well. But I pray that we desire nothing but to know you. And then when we know you, we know that to you nothing is impossible. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.